Hello, everybody. Shinobi here, and as was said, I'm here to talk about the future of Bitcoin. Unlike most of the people I saw speaking here today, though, I am a huge Bitcoin maximalist. So, in some ways, I think I am here to say I think a lot of you are wrong. Um, Obviously, zero knowledge proofs are assumed to be the next big building block for the Bitcoin ecosystem by everybody here. And I don't disagree inherently in terms of the application layer and just applying them around the edges. But I think the kind of characterization of how these tools and systems are going to be integrated deeper into Bitcoin is just kind of disconnected from the actual reality of things. So to kind of make an example of my point here, the whole frenzy over the last year or so has kind of been the race to build ZK rollups on Bitcoin and pitching this as the, consumer aligned, consumer facing scaling solution. But I think kind of the reality that gets glossed under or glossed over, swept under the rug is that these systems are all intermediated systems. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, I don't see any real core difference between a BitVM based rollup and something like Liquid, a federated sidechain from the point of view of the end user. Like in both cases, there is no ability for them to unilaterally exit the system. In both cases, they have no direct control or interaction with the Bitcoin actually locked on the main blockchain. And despite all the kind of extra machinery built on top of that, that's the fundamental reality of those systems. And so, what I'm kind of here to talk about is where does the future go in terms of the nature of different systems built on top of Bitcoin? And I would argue there's only two fundamental types of systems that can exist. Intermediated systems, so things like Liquid, like these BitVM based rollups, even a business like Coinbase with a centralized ledger on the back, and then interactive systems. So things where you do actually have a direct interaction with the coin's custody on chain. You do have the ability to exit yourself. Systems like Lightning, or even systems like state chains, which are essentially kind of a hybridization of the interactive and the intermediated model. But fundamentally, these things are the two directions we can go in. And despite a lot of the optimism around OpCat and OpCat based verifiers I've seen in some of the presentations and projects here, I don't think that that's something that Bitcoiners should take for granted. I think the cold hard reality is that we might be fast approaching, if not already reached, a point of social ossification where it's just not tractable or tenable to coordinate a consensus update to Bitcoin anymore. And this shouldn't, surprise anybody who knows me that I say that at all. But I don't think it should surprise those of you who don't know me either. Like we've just seen, the new president of the United States continue fomenting rhetoric around a strategic Bitcoin reserve. We are seeing individual states in the United States start putting forward legislation for their own reserves at the state level. We're even seeing, other nations like the Czech Republic, the central bank there is considering adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet. Like if these types of occurrences continue and domino in terms of price growth, overall adoption growth, then pushing for a consensus change is going to be nothing like any project in this space has ever dealt with. You are talking about nation states who now have to consider that asset as something of national security importance on their balance sheet. They have to consider the implications of these changes. And depending on how financially exposed they are, what the implications of those changes could be for their balance sheet. Like, this is a whole new world. And the simple reality is, we might be stuck with what we have. And that leaves us with these two paths of intermediated or interactive. And what do we do with that? Like, the general conversation around scaling Bitcoin has been focused on chasing ideal systems, systems that have the perfect set of trade-offs, that a user has self-sovereign control over their money. They're able to make instant and cheap payments. They don't have to sit around online or have these types of liquidity credit arrangements that systems like Lightning require. And I think the simple reality is, we're never going to get those ideal systems. And so when looking at what makes an intermediated system versus an interactive system, and how can you hybridize these two different types of systems built on top of Bitcoin? And just kind of the simplest example to make there is, think of a basic primitive like multisig, which I'm sure seems like nothing and something to be taken for granted when looking at the types of ZK constructions most of the presenters here and their projects are building upon. But that simple piece is essentially a bedrock of both types of these systems. Even all of these ZK rollups built on BitVM, inherently at the very base root of all of those systems, depend on multisig. Like, that N of N address that's ultimately holding the BitVM funds and encumbering them with whatever BitVM logic is encoded in a challenge response protocol. It's a multisig. But that's also what gives us a more interactive self-custodial system like Lightning. It's multi-sig at the root of it. That's what's actually signing all of these off-chain states. And so, how far can you actually push this? Like, how much expressivity can you have in different threat models, different degrees of delegating trust? Like, where is the design space here? And I think the reality is that we have not done enough to really explore and consider that. Even just a very basic concept, like smart contracts unchained, which is an old proposal from the Bitcoin developer ZMNSCP-XJ. And it's literally just as simple as, you create a multi-sig with an escrow agent and then have them enforce different logic and co-sign off of that with whatever cooperative party is available. Like, that's might seem ridiculously simple, but now start building up on top of that. Like, we have a much more complicated system like BitVM built on top of that bedrock of multisig. Like, you could just simply have that smart contract on chain setup bonded to a BitVM setup. Like, all of the focus I've seen on BitVM has mostly just been on securing a bridge, but that can be used to kind of directly instantiate just a single use contract if it's high value enough. And you can kind of follow that basic train of design space to things like Jeremy Rubin's recent proposal on unfunctionally encrypted covenants, which is essentially doing exactly this type of scheme. You simply have a entity or an oracle that's now being placed in a position to sign for things, but instantiating bonding logic using a construct like BitVM. Like, you can now, rather than just considering bridges into another system that is ultimately an intermediated system, generalizing that and actually having a more direct emulation of functionality we want to see at the base layer of Bitcoin that we might not see, and use that to kind of compose and build up to whole other system designs. And it really just comes down to like different primitives. Everybody keeps kind of latching on to a new single proposal or a new single system design. And everybody gets infatuated with that and thinks this is going to be the next big thing until eventually that either fails to pan out or hits the extremes of what it can actually accomplish given the engineering constraints of its architecture. And I don't think that rollups are going to be any different than Lightning in that regard. Like these systems are going to be built, like are being built. They're going to bring some degree of new functionality and potentially scalability to the system. But at the end of the day, they're going to hit their roadblock. They're going to hit their ceiling, their end limits. And it's not going to be this one thing that everyone's fixated on. It's going to be all of these things that people successively fixate on, eventually over time being broken down into their basic primitives and composed. And that's just inevitably like the only thing to actually do if you want a truly open interactive system and not something that just devolves to a competition of walled gardens that are all trying to capture a user base and maximally extract value from them. And so, kind of similarly to how we have this dichotomy or binary choice between intermediation or interactivity to scale systems on a technical level, I think we also kind of have this binary choice of are we going to build closed walled garden or walled garden style systems, or are we actually going to try to have an open interoperable system? That requires, I think, just stepping back from this system fixation, this architecture fixation, and actually breaking everything down to the primitives and just considering how do you compose them in different or novel or unique ways, or what are the commonalities between two different systems and the primitives used to construct them. Like, what doors does that open in terms of hybridizing those systems into a single architecture to get a better balance of the strengths and the weaknesses of each architecture on its own? But ultimately, the future of Bitcoin, I think, is at a very precarious fork in the road. Like we are ultimately at this choice of which way do we go? Do we go towards walled gardens and closed systems where people are just playing zero sum competitive games for user capture? Or do we actually try to step back and look at the basic building blocks that are used to construct these systems? And as we build them out in the first place, rather than fixating on a single architecture or fixating on the type of zero sum walled garden thinking that has dominated most of the rest of this space outside of Bitcoin, and truly build things from the get go to be as interoperable and as open as possible. And sorry to break it to you, I don't have a proclamation about which path we're going to take. I just know that we're kind of standing at that fork and we're going to have to make a choice sometime soon. So I'd like to say thank you for inviting me to close this conference out. And I hope that everybody makes the right choice. So to all the builders out there, keep building.
Thanks so much, Shinobi. We really appreciate your time and your closing remarks. That concludes the Bitcoin Economy Conference. Hopefully you learned or were reminded of the immense potential and exciting developments within the Bitcoin ecosystem. Today, we've witnessed thought-provoking keynotes, insightful panels, and dynamic discussions that not only explored cutting-edge technologies, but also delved into the economic foundations that drive the future of Bitcoin. Thank you to our esteemed speakers, panelists, and moderators for sharing your expertise, and to our sponsors for making this event possible. Most importantly, thank you to our audience for joining us today. We hope you found value in the conversations and gained insight to propel your projects forward, and we look forward to seeing you at House of ZK's ZK Hub during ETH Denver. Thank you and have a great evening.
Expand Bitcoin's utility without sacrificing its security. Citrea enables Bitcoin to function as a fully programmable financial platform using zero-knowledge technology. With Citrea, developers can build scalable payment systems, tap into Bitcoin's liquidity with financial applications, and build privacy systems. Citrea is currently on testnet and approaching mainnet. Follow the progress at Citrea_XYZ.
My intuition is that we do see SNOCs kind of eating cryptography in the sense that they become a commoditized building block, just like hash functions are. But I also see them kind of eating the world of computation. So one of my dreams, in some sense, is to have CPUs where there's an onboard prover that generates proofs in real time.
Our vision is that in maybe the next 10 years, most of the computation is actually not going to happen on-chain, but it's going to happen in an off-chain environment. And this is the future we're building towards.
My personal thesis on this is that ZK is going to long-term be as significant of a technology as, say, public key encryption. That it's going to be something that every computer science student learns in their freshman year.
Pretty simple thesis that ZK is really important to blockchains and scaling. The future of ZK is ZK VMs, and we want to build the best one.
There will be a day where we no longer need consensus because we have that real-time generation. What will have been secured by consensus will be secured by cryptography and math.
I see the space moving to where every application will use ZK. Every application will use zero knowledge for its data, for its bridging, for its co-processing, for the execution spaces it sits on. It will be as intertwined into the fabric of crypto as consensus is. And to get to that point, we need highly efficient proving. We need, frankly, liveness guarantees on that proving. And we need crypto infrastructure that can support a heterogeneity of innovation on proving systems.
I do think that we're going to see a lot of infra converge to provable VMs, also known as ZK VMs. Depending on the use cases, they might be adapted, but overall, I think we're going to see a shift from low-level circuits to ZK VMs.
So there's so many things you can squeeze out of ZK, you know, and it just gets better when you combine these other tools.
We can use our knowledge in ZK to build these applications on Bitcoin, which may help Bitcoin make Bitcoin maybe 100% use the only blockchain again in the world, because Bitcoin is the best monetary asset that we have. Bitcoin blockchain is the most secure blockchain that we have.
I will say that the boldest prediction though is, and it's not me making this up, a friend of mine, Vinishri Rao, she's I think a famous cryptographer, you guys probably know her. She's launching the Fermat network, and she's been out there publicly saying that her prediction is that ZK is going to replace blockchain.
You have the code, you have the input, which is all the transactions, and you put that in. You create statements and you generate proofs. There is no component whatsoever of blockchain, but ZK is a component, and this is an example to explain also my thesis that I think ZK will become bigger than blockchain.